The transport ship shuddered as it docked with Station Vera 7, and Cadet Elijah Vance felt his stomach tighten with anticipation rather than fear. He had waited 3 years for this moment, training harder than anyone back on Earth, pushing his body and mind beyond what most humans thought possible, all for the chance to stand among the stars and prove that humanity belonged here. The airlock hissed open and Elijah stepped onto the station's polished floors, his boots clicking against metal that had been forged in shipyards older than human civilization itself. Around him walked creatures of every shape and size, some towering 3 meters tall, with scales that shimmered like oil on water. Others small and quick, with too many eyes and not enough limbs by human standards. And all of them looked at the group of human cadets with expressions that ranged from curiosity to open contempt. "First-generation Terrans," whispered a Valorian cadet to his companion, not bothering to keep his voice down. "I heard their homeworld does not even have proper climate control. They still experience seasons like animals." Elijah heard every word, but kept his face blank. He had been warned about this, told that humanity was the newest species in the Galactic Coalition, and that respect would not be given freely. It would have to be earned in blood and sweat and sacrifice, just as everything worth having had always been earned throughout human history. The human cadets numbered only 12, selected from millions of applicants across Earth. Each one represented the best their species had to offer, chosen not just for physical ability, but for mental resilience and the capacity to remain calm under pressure that would break lesser beings. They walked in formation through the station's corridors, following holographic arrows that guided them toward the Combat Academy's orientation. Hall Senior Instructor Kethvora stood at the center of the hall when they arrived, and Elijah's first thought was that she looked like a nightmare given form. She was Silvari, a species known throughout the galaxy for their speed and precision, standing over 2 meters tall, with 4 arms that ended in hands capable of movements faster than most eyes could track. Her carapace was a deep purple, almost black, and her compound eyes reflected the light in a way that made it impossible to tell where she was looking. "Cadets," she announced, her voice carrying easily through the hall despite the hundreds of beings present. "I am Senior Instructor Kethvora, and for the next cycle, your lives belong to me. I will teach you to fight to survive, and if you are worthy, to become warriors the Coalition can depend upon." She began walking through the assembled cadets, her 4 arms clasped behind her back in a posture that somehow conveyed both authority and threat. She paused briefly before members of each species, offering comments that were sometimes encouraging, but more often cutting when she reached the human cadets. She stopped completely and let out a sound that Elijah's translator rendered as a dismissive laugh. "Ah, yes," Kethvora said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "The Terrans. I was told we would be receiving some of you this cycle, though I cannot imagine why the Coalition wastes resources training species so recently emerged from their planetary cradle." She leaned down toward Elijah, who stood at the front of the human formation, and her compound eyes seemed to bore into him with an intensity that would have made most beings step back. Elijah did not move. "Tell me, human," she said, "on your world, do you even have combat training, or do you simply throw rocks at each other and hope for the best?" Several alien cadets laughed at this, and Elijah could feel the tension radiating from his fellow humans. But he had trained for this too, trained to swallow his pride when necessary, trained to wait for the right moment rather than react from emotion. "We have many forms of combat training, Senior Instructor," Elijah replied, his voice steady and respectful. "I would be honored to demonstrate them if you wish." Kethvora made that dismissive sound again and straightened up, apparently losing interest in the human, who had failed to provide her with the entertainment of watching him squirm. "Soft world dwellers," she announced to the hall. "That is what humans are. They come from a planet where the gravity is barely enough to build proper muscle, where the atmosphere hands them oxygen like a gift, where they have spent their entire evolutionary history being coddled by a universe that should have killed them long ago. She returned to the center of the hall and spread all four arms wide. Tomorrow, we begin calibration spars. Each of you will face me in single combat so that I may assess your baseline abilities and assign you to appropriate training groups. The Valorians will spar first, then the Krethel, then the Morvani. She paused and looked directly at the human cadets. The Terrans will go last. I see no reason to waste the morning's best hours on species that have not yet proven they deserve to be here. The insult was clear and intentional, and this time Elijah did feel his jaw tighten. But he breathed slowly and let the anger pass through him rather than taking root. There would be time for answers tomorrow. Time to show this instructor and everyone else watching exactly what humanity was capable of, as the cadets were dismissed to their quarters. One of Elijah's fellow humans, a woman named Chun, fell into step beside him. "She is going to try to break us tomorrow," Chun said quietly. "You know that, right?" Elijah nodded, his eyes fixed forward. Let her try. That night, Elijah lay in his bunk and stared at the ceiling, thinking about everything that had brought him here. He thought about his grandfather, a Marine who had served in 3 wars and taught Elijah how to fight before he could read. He thought about his mother, who had cried when he was selected for the program, but told him to make Earth proud. He thought about the billions of humans back home who would never see the stars, but who were counting on him and the other cadets to prove that humanity had a place. Among them, tomorrow, an alien who had trained warriors for 60 cycles would try to humiliate him in front of the entire Academy. Elijah smiled in the darkness. She had no idea what was coming. The combat arena filled with cadets and officers from across the station. Hundreds of beings gathering to watch senior instructor Kethvora conduct her famous calibration spars. The arena itself was a circular platform raised above the main floor, surrounded by transparent barriers that would contain the violence within while allowing everyone a clear view of the action. Elijah stood with the other human cadets at the back of the crowd, watching as Kethvora took her place at the center of the ring. Even from this distance, he could see the casual confidence in every movement she made. The way her 4 arms hung loose and ready at her sides. The slight tilt of her head that suggested she was already bored by what was to come. "First spar," announced the arena's automated voice system. Valorian Cadet Thress versus Senior Instructor Kethvora. The Valorian was large, nearly as tall as Kethvora herself, with thick scales covering a body that looked built for war. He entered the ring with his head held high and took a fighting stance that Elijah recognized as the Valorian primary form. Designed to use their natural weight and armor to overwhelm opponents, Kethvora did not even bother taking a stance. The spar lasted 11 seconds. Kethvora moved like water given violent purpose, flowing around the Valorian's attacks and striking at joints and pressure points with a precision that made the massive alien look like a clumsy child. When it was over, Thress lay on the ground gasping for breath while Kethvora stood over him without a single mark on her carapace. "Adequate baseline," she announced. "You rely too much on your armor and not enough on your speed." Training Group 3. The spars continued throughout the morning, and Elijah watched every single one with careful attention. He studied the way Kethvora moved, the patterns she fell into when facing different body types, the subtle tells that preceded her most powerful strikes. He noticed that she always favored her upper right arm for finishing blows, that she stepped slightly left before launching combination attacks, that she grew careless when she thought an opponent was already beaten by midday. She had defeated 47 cadets without taking a single meaningful hit, and the crowd had grown restless with the predictability of it all. But then the automated voice made its final announcement. "Final spar group. Terran cadets versus senior instructor Kethvara. A murmur went through the crowd, and Elijah felt hundreds of eyes turn toward him and his fellow humans. Some of those gazes held curiosity, wondering what the new species would show, but most held only the expectation of entertainment at their expense. "I will spar with all 12 Terrans at once," Kethvara announced, and laughter rippled through the arena. "I see no reason to waste time on individual assessments when the result will be the same regardless." Elijah felt Chun tense beside him, but he placed a hand on her arm. "No," he said quietly. "Let me go first." Alone, he stepped forward before anyone could argue and walked toward the ring with slow, deliberate steps. The crowd grew quiet as they watched this single human approach, confused by his willingness to face the instructor without the support of his companions. "One Terran wishes to spar alone," Kethvara said, a voice dripping with amusement. "How brave. Or perhaps how foolish. Tell me, human, do you know what you are walking into?" Elijah stepped onto the platform and took a position across from her. His stance relaxed in a way that seemed almost lazy compared to the rigid forms the other cadets had used. "I know exactly what I am walking into." Senior instructor. Kethvara's compound eyes fixed on him, and he could feel her reassessing, trying to understand why this soft-world dweller showed no fear. But then her mandibles clicked in what he now recognized as dismissal, and she began to circle him. "Your planet," she said, still loud enough for the crowd. "I have read about it. A world where the inhabitants poison their own atmosphere, where they wage war against each other over invisible lines in the dirt, where they have only possessed space travel for a few generations. Tell me, what could such a species possibly teach the galaxy about combat?" Elijah said nothing, simply turning to keep her in front of him. Her circling grew tighter, more aggressive, and he could see frustration building in the set of her shoulders. She was used to opponents who reacted to her taunts, who let their emotions create openings she could exploit. But this human just watched her with eyes that gave nothing away. "Nothing to say?" she demanded. "Perhaps you are not brave after all. Perhaps you are simply too primitive to understand the insult." Still, Elijah remained silent, his breathing slow and even, and that was when Kethvara lost her patience. She abandoned all pretense of sparring protocol and struck him across the face with her full strength. An open-hand blow from her upper right arm that was designed not to test but to humiliate, to break his spirit in front of everyone watching and send a diverse message about what happened to species that forgot their place. The sound echoed through the suddenly silent arena. Elijah's head moved perhaps 2 centimeters to the side. A thin line of blood appeared at the corner of his lip, where his strike had split the skin, and then, slowly, he smiled. Kethvara felt something she had not experienced in decades of combat. Doubt. She had hit this human with a blow that would have shattered the jaw of most species, that would have sent the Valorians stumbling backward, that would have killed a Morvani outright. But this human simply stood there, bleeding and smiling, as if she had done nothing more than tap him on the cheek. "On Earth," Elijah said, his voice carrying clearly through the silent arena, "we call that a love tap." He wiped the blood from his lip with the back of his hand and looked at it for a moment before meeting her compound eyes again. "Is that all you have got, senior instructor?" The arena erupted in shocked murmurs, and Elijah saw officers leaning forward in their observation posts, suddenly very interested in what was happening on the platform. But he kept his attention on Kethvara, watching the way her forearms tensed, the way her weight shifted onto her back legs. She was going to attack him for real now. Good. That was exactly what he wanted. Kethvara attacked with all the fury of a warrior whose pride had been wounded. And suddenly the casual instructor was gone, replaced by the killing machine that had earned her reputation across a dozen star systems. Her forearms became a blur of motion, each one striking from a different angle. each blow carrying enough force to crack bone and rupture organs. Elijah moved. He did not move like the other cadets had moved, desperately trying to avoid damage. Instead, he moved like something ancient and dangerous, something that had spent millions of years learning how to survive against predators faster and stronger than itself. He let some blows land, absorbing them with his core and rolling with the impact to minimize damage. While slipping away from the strikes that would have done real harm, the crowd fell completely silent, unable to process what they were seeing. This human was taking hits that should have crippled him and simply continuing forward, closing the distance between himself and an opponent who had dominated every species the galaxy. Had to offer. Kethvora struck his ribs with a combination that would have dropped a Kreth-all warrior, and she felt something give beneath her hands. But instead of falling, the human grunted and used the moment of contact to grab one of her wrists, pulling her off balance for just an instant. In that instant, he hit her. It was not a flashy strike, not the kind of spinning kick or elaborate technique that Hollywood fights were made of. It was a simple, brutal punch to the nerve cluster beneath her lower left arm, delivered with perfect precision and the kind of power that should not have existed in a species from a soft world. Kethvora felt her arm go numb. She tried to pull back, to create distance, but the human stayed with her, moving inside her reach where her speed advantage meant nothing. He was fighting like a Varshani pit fighter, she realized with shock, using close-range techniques that negated her superior arm length. Another punch landed, this one to the joint where her upper right arm met her thorax, and she felt the carapace crack under the impact. How was this possible? She had studied Terran physiology, knew their muscle density was unremarkable, and their bones were fragile compared to most species. Where was this power coming from? She managed to land a knee strike to his midsection and heard him exhale sharply. But when she tried to follow up with a finishing blow, he caught her arm mid-swing and held it there. He simply held it there, his grip like a vice made of flesh, and no matter how hard she pulled, she could not break free. Humans, Elijah said, his breathing heavy but controlled, evolved as persistence predators on a world that was trying to kill us from the day we crawled out of the ocean. We are not the fastest species on Earth, and we are not the strongest. But we learned to hunt by chasing our prey until it collapsed from exhaustion, by taking wounds that would stop other predators and simply refusing to die. He released her arm and stepped back, not pressing his advantage, showing a control that somehow felt more threatening than continued aggression. Everything on our planet wants to kill us, he continued. The weather, the wildlife, the diseases, even the plants. We spend our entire evolutionary history fighting for survival against a world that offered no mercy, and that is what made us what we are. Kethvora attacked again, but something had changed. Her movements were slightly slower now, her injured arm throwing off her balance, and she could feel the unfamiliar sensation of fatigue beginning to creep into her muscles. She had been fighting all morning, spar after spar, never needing to exert herself fully because no opponent had required it. This human was requiring it. And more, she landed a solid strike to his shoulder and heard something pop. But he just switched his stance to compensate, adapting in real time to his own injury in a way that spoke of deep training and an intimate understanding of his own body's limits. Do you know what we call a wound like that on Earth? He asked, still circling, still pressing forward despite the damage he had taken. We call it an inconvenience. The arena had descended into chaos around them. Officers shouting into communicators and cadets pressing against the barriers to get a better view. A Valorian admiral in the observation deck had risen from his seat and was watching with an intensity that suggested he was seeing something that would change the way he thought about the galaxy. Elijah launched his own offensive then, and Kethvora realized with horror that he had been holding back. The techniques he used now were not from any single fighting style, but from dozens, blended together in combinations that should not have worked but did. He struck into joints and pressure points with the precision of a Sylvari assassin, absorbed her counters with the resilience of a Krethel berserker, and moved with an adaptability that seemed to learn from every exchange she hit him with everything she had. And he kept coming. She targeted his injuries, trying to exploit the damage she had already done. And he kept coming. She pushed herself to speeds she had not reached in years, burning through her energy reserves, and still he kept coming. Finally, she threw a desperate strike with her strongest arm, putting everything she had left into a blow meant to end the fight once and for all. Elijah caught her arm with both hands, his grip so strong that she could feel her carapace groaning under the pressure. And for a long moment they stood there, locked together, her greatest strength matched against his impossible endurance. Then, slowly, he pushed her arm back toward her. "This fight is over," he said quietly, for her ears only. "But I'm not going to humiliate you the way you tried to humiliate me. I am going to let go now, and you are going to end this spar with whatever dignity you want to preserve." He released her and stepped back, then bowed in the traditional Sylvari manner, the gesture of a student thanking a teacher. "Thank you for the lesson, senior instructor." Kethvara stood frozen, her injury screaming, her mind trying to process what had just happened. And around her the arena erupted into sounds she had never heard directed at one of her spars before. Applause for the human. The medical unit hummed quietly as Kethvara sat on the examination table, watching the automated systems apply healing compounds to the cracks in her carapace. In 60 cycles of teaching combat, she had never needed medical attention after a calibration spar, had never faced an opponent who could push her past the point of casual dominance. The human had broken 3 of her joints, cracked her carapace in 4 places, and bruised the nerve clusters that controlled 2 of her arms. And he had done it while fighting with a dislocated shoulder, fractured ribs, and internal bleeding that would have killed most species before the fight was even finished. How was that possible? She pulled up the Coalition database on her personal terminal and entered a search for Earth, the planet she had dismissed as a soft world without bothering to research. What appeared on her screen made her compound eyes widen in ways that would have embarrassed her if anyone had been watching. Earth was not a soft world, was a nightmare. The gravity was not weak as she had assumed. It was actually higher than the galactic average, which explained the dense muscle tissue hidden beneath the human's unimpressive appearance. The atmosphere was not gentle. It was a corrosive mixture of oxygen and nitrogen that would poison most species within hours. But humans breathed it like it was nothing. She scrolled through the planetary data and felt her certainty crumbling with every new fact. Earth's temperature varied by over 100 degrees between seasons, a range that would require most species to migrate or hibernate. But humans simply put on different clothing and continued their daily lives. The planet was covered with liquid water that could crush submarines at depth and waves that could destroy cities. Yet humans swam in it for recreation. The wildlife section made her physically recoil from the screen. These humans had evolved alongside creatures called sharks, which were essentially swimming mouths filled with regenerating teeth. They shared their world with bears, massive predators that could tear through metal with their claws. They had something called box jellyfish that could kill with a single touch. And yet humans entered the water anyway. But the most disturbing entry was for a creature called the wolves were pack hunters, apex predators that worked together to bring down prey many times their size. They were fast, intelligent, and utterly lethal. And what had humans done when they encountered these monsters? They had domesticated them. Humans had taken the deadliest predators on their planet and turned them into companions, into friends, into something they called pets that they allowed to sleep in their homes and play with their children. What kind of species looked at a killing machine and thought, I want to make that my friend? A knock at her door pulled her from her research, and she looked up to find Commander Vethkai standing in the entrance. The Coalition intelligence officer was a Morvani, small and unassuming. But Kethvora knew his reputation well enough to straighten her posture despite her injuries. "Commander," she said, "I did not expect a visit from intelligence." "I imagine not," Vethkai replied, stepping into the room and allowing the door to close behind him. "But after today's events, certain conversations have become necessary." He placed a data chip on the table beside her. "This is the Terran Threat Assessment," he said. "It has been classified at the highest levels since first contact with humanity 12 years ago. Only flag officers and select intelligence personnel have been authorized to view its contents." Kethvora stared at the chip. "Why are you showing this to me now?" "Because you just learned the hard way what this document contains," Vethkai said. "And because we needed to see if the assessment was accurate or if our analysts had exaggerated human capabilities." He paused, and something that might have been amusement flickered across his features. "Congratulations, instructor. You have confirmed that they did not exaggerate. If anything, they may have underestimated." Kethvora inserted the chip into her terminal and began reading. And with every paragraph, her understanding of the galaxy shifted beneath. The assessment covered everything. Human endurance that allowed them to chase prey for days without rest. Pain tolerance that let them continue functioning with wounds that would incapacitate other species. An immune system so aggressive that it sometimes attacked the human's own body just to stay in practice. The ability to heal from injuries that would be permanent for most beings. Regrowing tissue and even adapting to lost limbs with mechanical replacements they built themselves. But the section that disturbed her most was the one on human warfare. These beings had invented combat as sport, had developed thousands of different styles of fighting over their history, had spent their entire existence finding new and creative ways to hurt each other. They had weapons that could level cities, diseases they had engineered for war, and a documented willingness to sacrifice their own lives if it meant victory. The assessment's conclusion was stark. Do not engage humans in ground combat unless absolutely necessary. Do not allow them to close distance. Do not assume they are defeated until confirmed dead. Even then, verify twice. Recommend orbital bombardment for any conflict, requiring human pacification. We have known what they are since we first encountered them, Vethkai said, watching her read. But the coalition leadership decided that the common population was not ready for that knowledge. They believed that if other species knew the truth about humans, it would cause panic. Then why tell me now? Kethvora demanded. Why let me walk into that arena without warning? Vethkai's expression did not change, because we needed someone to test the assessment's accuracy, and you were the logical choice. Your reputation would give the test credibility, and your survival was, he paused, considered acceptable. Kethvora wanted to be angry, wanted to rage at the manipulation, but she found she could not. She was too busy thinking about the human cadet who had chosen to show her mercy, who could have broken her in front of everyone, but had instead offered her a way to preserve her dignity. What kind of species produced warriors like that? What happens now? She asked. Now, Vethkai said, you train them, and you do it properly, because the coalition is going to need them. There are threats beyond our borders that even our best warriors cannot match. But these humans, he nodded toward her injuries, these humans might just be able to. He turned and walked toward the door, then paused. One more thing, instructor. The cadet you fought, Elijah Vance. His injuries were more severe than he allowed anyone to see. He fought the last half of your spar with a punctured lung. The medical staff could not understand how he was still standing, let alone winning. The door closed behind him, and Kethvora sat alone with the weight of everything she had learned. She had called humans primitive. She had called them soft. She had been so very, very wrong. 1 week had passed since the spar that changed everything, and the Combat Academy had not stopped talking about what they had witnessed. Rumors spread through the station like fire through dry grass, growing more elaborate with each retelling, until the story of the human cadet who had defeated Senior Instructor Kethvara had become something approaching legend. Elijah spent most of that week in the medical unit, not because he could not function with his injuries, but because the doctors had threatened to sedate him if he did not allow them to finish their treatments. Humans healed quickly by galactic standards, but even they needed time to recover from punctured lungs and shattered ribs on the 7th day. He was cleared for light duty and made his way to the training grounds, expecting to find the other human cadets running drills or sparring with each other. Instead, he found the entire assembly gathered in the main arena, and at the center stood Kethvara, looked different than she had before their fight. The arrogance was gone from her posture, replaced by something that might have been uncertainty. And when her compound eyes found Elijah in the crowd, she raised one of her arms in a gesture he did not recognize. Cadet Vance. She called out, "Approach." The crowd parted for him, hundreds of aliens watching as he walked toward the instructor who had tried to humiliate him just 1 week ago. He kept his expression neutral, unsure what to expect but ready for anything when he reached her. Kethvara did something that made the entire arena gasp. She bowed, not the shallow bow of an instructor acknowledging a student, but the deep bow of a warrior showing respect to an equal. It was a gesture that Silvari reserved for those they considered worthy of honor, and in the Academy's long history, no instructor had ever offered it to a first-cycle cadet. "I was wrong about your species," Kethvara said, her voice carrying to every corner of the arena. "I allowed my prejudice to blind me to what humans truly are, and I paid for that blindness with blood and broken pride. You showed me mercy when you could have shown me humiliation, and for that I owe you a debt that words cannot repay." She straightened and turned to address the full assembly. "From this day forward, human cadets will no longer train under standard protocols. They will train under Apex protocols, the same regimen used for species classified as elevated threats. This is not punishment. This is recognition of what they are capable of and what they deserve." A murmur went through the crowd, and Elijah saw expressions of shock on the faces of cadets who had dismissed humans just days before. Apex protocols were reserved for species like the Krethel Berserkers and the Void Stalkers of the Outer Rim. Being so dangerous that standard training could not contain them, the human cadets were being placed in that category. Additionally, Kethvara continued, "I will be personally overseeing human combat training. I have much to learn about their fighting styles, and I suspect they have much to teach." The assembly was dismissed, but Kethvara gestured for Elijah to remain. When they were alone in the arena, she allowed some of the formal bearing to drop from her shoulders. "I read your species file," she said. "The classified one that I should have been given before you ever set foot in my arena. I know now why you did not break when I struck you. And I know that what you showed me in our spar was restraint, not your full capability." Elijah considered lying, considered maintaining the polite fiction that their fight had been evenly matched. But something in her eyes told him she deserved the truth. "On Earth," he said, "we have a saying, never show your full hand. You were trying to break my spirit, so I showed you just enough to prove you could not. If you had been trying to kill me, the fight would have gone differently. You would have killed me," Kethvara said. "It was not a question. I would have done whatever was necessary to survive. That is what humans do." She was quiet for a long moment, processing this confirmation of everything she had read in the assessment. "Your people frighten me," she admitted, "and I do not frighten easily. But they also fascinate me. You are not like any species the Coalition has encountered before, and I believe that before long, the galaxy will need warriors like you." 3 years passed. Elijah graduated at the top of his class and was given command of a mixed species unit, the first human to hold such a position in Coalition history. His team included Valorians and Krethel and Morvani, beings who had once looked down on humanity but now followed a human into battle without hesitation, and at his side, serving as his combat advisor, was Kethvora. She had requested the assignment personally, turning down promotions and prestigious postings to serve under a cadet. She had once tried to humiliate other officers, thought she was crazy, throwing away her career to follow a human. But Kethvora knew something they did not. She knew that wherever Elijah Vance went, history would follow, and she intended to be there when it did one evening. As the unit prepared for deployment to a contested system where Coalition forces had been struggling against an unknown threat, a young Valorian cadet approached Kethvora with a question that had been burning in his mind since he was assigned to the unit senior advisor. He said, using the title she had earned, "May I ask why you chose to serve under Commander Vance? You trained warriors for 60 cycles. You could be running your own academy. Why follow a human?" Kethvora looked across the hangar to where Elijah stood, reviewing tactical data with his officers, his presence somehow commanding attention, despite being shorter and less physically impressive than everyone around him. "Because I struck him once," she said, her voice soft with memory, "and I learned more about war in that moment than in 60 cycles of teaching it." Humans do not forget lessons. They become them. She turned back to the young cadet. Somewhere in the galaxy, other species are still underestimating humanity. They look at humans and see soft skin and fragile bones and short lives, and they assume that means weakness. Her mandibles clicked in what might have been amusement. I almost pity them. She paused, considering, almost. Across the hangar, Elijah finished his briefing and looked up to find Kethvora watching him. He offered her a small nod, the kind of acknowledgement that passed between warriors who had tested each other and found respect in the testing tomorrow. They would fly into battle together. Tomorrow they would show the galaxy what happened when humanity and its allies stood side by side. But tonight, they were simply soldiers, bound by blood and broken pride, and a single moment in an arena where an alien trainer had struck a human cadet and regret had hit faster than her hand.